Good evening. Captain Retired Matt Edwards here with the next installment of the Weekly Observation Post Facebook Live broadcast for the 18th of April 2024. Now let me get up the numbered list. I'll read off and explain a couple of those issue items, things, and then I'll tell you something that was bugging me all week. I've been sort of down in the weeds on employment insurance of all things, because I think the government's doing it wrong. No surprise, anything I look at usually is being done wrong. But the thing is these are what you call statutory deductions, and they shouldn't be getting them wrong, right? Okay. The first item on the list that I'll use is number 484, Canada Pension Plan / Granovsky Supreme Court of Canada 2000 case and public policy. Now what I'm getting at, I think, because I didn't make any notes at the time I put that note in my list, is that they said that the Canada Pension Plan Retirement, the Supreme Court said, was universal. Everybody gets it. But the Canada Pension Plan Disability, they said, was conditional. Now I got news for them son of a bitches on the Supreme Court. According to Minister LaMarche back in 1964, it was a right. Now, a right can't be conditional. So it is my allegation, based on my research, that they have been doing this wrong ever since 1966. And they have been giving it out, doling it out a little bit at a time to people who can't work and trying not to give it to people who should probably have gotten it. Number 485. The flat rate Canada Pension Plan Disability contributor always gets more than what they contributed, which disproves any notion that it is bad to get more. Now this is something that I was thinking about recently as well, because I was talking to, back in 2018, my Member of Parliament staff, and one of them had the temerity to say to me when I went over there to try to help a veteran by the name of Sean Kareen, "Oh my God, Matt, he gets over $10,000 a month." To which I said, I don't give a fuck. Because you can't just look at someone getting X number of dollars a month and say, well, that's terrible, they shouldn't be getting as much. You got to look at what they get it. Now, the Canada Pension Plan Disability flat rate has been in place ever since 1966, but in 1966 it was $25 out of a total maximum of $104. Now, by the time you get up to 1987, they discovered that there was a major discrepancy between the Quebec Pension Plan Disability flat rate and the Canada Pension Plan Disability flat rate, and Quebecers were getting 3 times as much in the flat rate. Now, that reminds me of a case about employment insurance, and it was about EI for someone with a child, and a woman with a child on EI got more money than a man with a child on EI. I think a single parent maybe. And the Supreme Court of Canada, when it looked at it, said, we can fix this in 2 ways. We can take it from her, or we can give it to him. If we take it from her, it's called equality with a vengeance. We're not going to do that, because everybody will be equal, but it'll be equally bad. Well, in the Quebec pension plan, getting 3 times as much, they could have lowered it to the same amount as the Canada Pension Plan Disability. But no, that would have been equality with a vengeance. So they decided to increase the Canada Pension Plan Disability. Now, in the old days, you could get Canada Pension Plan Disability with 2 out of 3 years. So you could have 2 years working, become disabled, and then you get the Canada Pension Plan Disability, which has a flat rate, which you would have got the flat rate anyway. It's not tied to your service or anything. So it forms a pretty big chunk of money for the people that are disabled early in their careers. Now, anyway, I'll move on to 486 here. I'll be talking on like pension mortality and the magic number. Now what I'm getting at there is that federal pensions generally have a magic number, which is age and years of service got to equal 85. Don't know where they got that. But they do have this number. It's a rule. It may be a law, but it's a regulation. It's something. So the thing is, people who are disabled die quicker. It's called an increased mortality. Don't take it from me. It's actually in the Hansard, which is a record of parliamentary debate. Okay? Back in 1970, when they were discussing an increase for people that are on the Pension Act, but they wanted to give them a special allowance, and part of the special allowance was said to be for a shortened lifespan. Now, the shortened lifespan payment was part of the exceptional incapacity allowance. Another item that was listed in that, of the 5 issues, 5 items, was pain and discomfort. Now, discomfort sounds an awful lot to me like suffering. So, if you're getting a Pension Act pension, you're not getting, unless you're over 98% or higher on the table of disabilities, you are not getting a pain and suffering award. But if you're getting the exceptional incapacity allowance, then you're getting a pain and suffering award. Now, I'd say Canada, like all democracies, has a habit of not duplicating things. So if they have a pain and suffering award that they put into law in 1970 after the 1966 Woods Commission report, then that's all she wrote, boys. Don't try to convince me that I'm wrong when I'm right. Now, that's it for those issues. Next thing, and I'll probably do a couple of things, but I was having a gander at the Finance Canada Tax Expenditures reports, and I saw something that was bugging the shit out of me. Let me see if I can find a picture on my group, because I got a habit of putting all these pictures on my group to prove things, because, well, I mean, I'm not just going to tell you my opinion without showing why these are not opinions, they're facts. So, in the Employment Insurance Tax Expenditure Report, now I'll review the tax expenditures concept. It's a little strange, because what the government does is they figure that every dollar in Canada can be taxed. So things that they decide to give a credit for or an exception for, that's taxes that they could have collected, but they chose not to. So they decided that this would be, basically how they dole out credits. They pick favorites. Different groups get an advantage, and some groups, like the aged people that are old, get a age tax credit. So I thought I'd find it quicker. I'm here rambling on and I haven't found it yet. Now the thing is that I might find it quicker if I just look up my pictures I made. In fact, I think I'll do that. So the people who are writing these tax expenditure reports, okay, they must be idiots, because that's what got me all hot and bothered about EI. They tried to say that the tax deduction for the employment insurance premiums could be because of its being a job-related expense. Now, I don't follow the reasoning, but it's a very simple reason why employment insurance premiums, at least in my expert opinion, are not taxed. And that is because you can only get taxed on money that you get to receive and enjoy. Now, they passed the law, the Unemployment Insurance Act, and then it got changed the name to the Employment Insurance Act. And that's money that you don't get to receive. So you can't get taxed on money you don't get. But these idiots don't seem to understand that. And they put into this tax expenditure report some kind of bullshit, like I'm saying. Now, the other point is that they don't seem to understand that Canada has a policy against double taxation. So if they decided in their infinite wisdom that they would like to tax the premiums on employment insurance, well, they pass a law and they do it even if it ain't supposed to be happening. But let me see if it's in here. So what occurs to me, well, remember, tax expenditures are supposed to be things that they're losing on taxes, but they tax the employment insurance benefits. So why are they including it at all? It doesn't make them look very competent if they put something in here that we're losing the taxes on the employment insurance premiums, when if they just thought about it, they might come out ahead if you looked at how much money was collected in taxes on the employment insurance program when people became employed. Well, I looked it up, okay? Seemed to be about break even. According, I mean, there's a lot of variables, but if we say there's a 20% tax rate, I looked at how much money was paid out in EI in 2019. I looked at how much money was collected in the 2019 Tax Expenditures report. They said that there was $4 billion lost in 2019 because the government chose not to tax employment insurance premiums. Now let me let you in on a little secret. At least I think it's a secret, or they're stupid. They list in this official government report how much money they're losing off of personal income taxes, $4.02 billion. But $2.74 billion is what they list as the non-taxation of employer-paid premiums. Now, let me explain it a bit. I used to be a payroll tax collector, so believe it or not, I actually have real-life experience working on this shit. Okay? I was a payroll tax collector, and it was my job to know about employment insurance premiums and Canada pension plan, stuff like that. Well, there's 140% of what is collected off of the individual is assigned to be paid by the employer. Now, to the short-sighted and stupid people out there, maybe I shouldn't be insulting people like this, but they think that the employer actually pays this out of the employer's own money. But guess what? The Finance Canada Tax Expenditures report for 2019 says what I say, that the expense was really incurred by the employee totally. Now here's the implications for this. Doesn't really matter very much to me, is I don't work. But for working Canadians, they are not getting the total deduction that they should get. So instead of claiming, if you had $10 as the example I'm going to use, if you had $10 deducted from your check because of the Employment Insurance Act, the employer puts $14 with it, not $10, and then they remit $24 to Canada Revenue Agency, who then sends it to EI. But you ought to have $24 off of your taxes deducted because you didn't get to receive $24, not $10. It's going to be embarrassing for the government to fix it, and it's going to be expensive for the government to fix it. Right now, they're collecting taxes, more taxes than they should, because people are having their income inflated because they didn't get the proper tax reduction. Now, I just thought of this tonight, just before I came on the air, and this is not like a pension or a registered pension, RRSP, where it's only a deferral of taxes. This will actually cost the government more money. In a deferral of taxes, say you put money into an RRSP, it comes off your taxes, but you know you pay taxes on the money when you get it out. But for unemployment unemployment. See, it's an old habit. It used to be called the Unemployment Insurance Act way when I was growing up and when I first started teaching. But you don't have a guarantee of becoming unemployed. So, if you are allowed to collect all of the premiums, get a credit for all of the premiums when you're working and when you put in your taxes, well, that's going to cost the government more because they won't collect as much taxes. Some people might think, and this is another thought that has occurred to me recently, if you're getting paid to work or serve in the military, more money is better, right? Now, recently I was thinking that if the government thinks in the same way, and they think about taxes as their income, then they think that more taxes or more clawbacks is good. But you have to think about, in the case of clawbacks, how much is it hurting people? Okay? Because getting back to insurance, well, employment insurance is insurance as well. It's not a real insurance, it's called a social insurance. Well, I gotta get went off track there. Well, it's about disabled people. Veterans Affairs and CPPD is about disabled people, and employment insurance isn't about disabled people in general. Normally, it's about healthy people who haven't been able to get work after getting laid off, and they're ready, willing, and able to work, but they can't get it, so they get the employment insurance to soften the blow, a soft landing, give them time to look for another job. I'm not disagreeing with employment insurance that developed after the 1930s, like after the Great Depression, and people were thinking that in developed societies we can do better than this. We can do better than have people go on welfare or something. Now, don't get me wrong. Employment insurance is fully funded by the employee. Just like Canada Pension Plan is fully funded by the worker. See, the government doesn't mind setting up these programs, but it doesn't want to pay for them. So, it makes the people pay, and not the government giving out subsidies. Now, anyway, let me see what else I was going to talk about. Getting back to the idea of debt. Okay, I'll switch gears a bit. I thought of something recently when I was doing up this letter after I got triggered by a Canada Revenue Agency worker last week who was talking to me about my taxes that I haven't filed. I drafted up this letter. Now, I thought of another item to put on it. At least I think it's a new item unless I look at it and I find out that I already had it there. But this is not about CPPD as much as the income replacement benefit. Now, under Section 3 of the, or it might be 2, of the Veterans Wellbeing Act, it states that the Government of Canada owes an obligation to compensate people who are disabled in service. Now, if you have to repay someone for the injury they have suffered, you're not giving them income, you're not giving them social assistance or welfare, you're giving them a payment to balance the scales of justice, and you're making them whole. So the payment is not income. It doesn't increase your wealth. So therefore, the income replacement benefit is just taxed under Income Tax Act Section 61F.1. Cannot be taxed under that section. Now, I know what they did, or at least I strongly suspect I know what they did, to tax CPPD under Section 61F. So in 2006, when they brought in the earnings loss benefit, they brought in Section 61F.1 to tax a very similar benefit that they said when they were doing this up. They were going to create a mirror of the Service Income Support Insurance Plan. So let me give you an example of why they're mirrors. They both had a cap of 2% in the cost of living. They both were set at 75% of the soldier's pay before medical release, or anyway, being released. They have a 120-day application period, which is absolutely stupid because you get SCC automatically on medical release, so why have a 120-day limitation period for application? Now, maybe that's for people that are released other than medical. That's what I would suggest. Both ended at age 65, and everything under the sun is clawed back to try to save themselves money. So the fact that they taxed it under the very same section of the Income Tax Act, which is the fringe benefit section of contract of employment. Well, soldiers don't have a contract of employment. They have an office of employment, which is property. That's another thing I was thinking about recently. I used to always say, and now I have to reconsider my position, that Canadian soldiers don't have an employment contract, at least not an express one. So I saw it in the War Amputation of Canada Federal Court of Appeal case in 1997. They said that there was an implied contract with soldiers, that soldiers would give service to Canada, and Canada would, in return, give them pay, allowances, and a pension. The pension is the Pension Act pension if they become disabled. Allowances are for hardship, usually, like submarine allowances, paratrooper allowances, things like that. But what I was recently thinking is that there isn't even really an implied contract, because there is no contract, because the soldier owns property, not a contract of employment, which isn't property. Now, there's a couple of cases that leads me to believe that. There was nothing about a Canadian Forces member, but there's a case called Knight, Supreme Court of Canada, something, I don't remember the year. And the other one is Wells, Supreme Court of Canada, 1997 or 1998. And Andy Wells was a former St. John's mayor who became appointed by the Newfoundland government to a chairman of the Public Utilities Board. Now, he's a very abrasive person if he's still alive. People either love him or hate him. Well, the Newfoundland government decided they had enough of this outspoken fellow, and they legislated his job out of existence. Now, he sued and won because he had an office of employment, not a contract of employment. And the Supreme Court said that although the government could legally legislate his job out of existence, they couldn't legislate away the remuneration that goes along with his property. So owning the property gives you the right to the pay. Now, when a soldier becomes disabled and gets kicked out of the military via medical release, they lose their property. They lose the pay that's associated with that property. Now, I think this is an issue that somebody ought to take up one of these days. And I've always said, although I know about it, I was a reservist. And it might be property for me, but I only was a part-time soldier. So I think a regular force soldier should be the one who takes this up and sues the government for not getting compensated, not getting for the loss of the remuneration that is associated with losing the property. We're not saying the government can't take away the property, because the Wells case said they could. But they have to compensate us for the loss of our office of employment, which has an associated salary. Now, let me just wing that a bit. If they paid income replacement benefit to everybody with no clawbacks and stuff, you could say that you were compensated for them taking away your office. But because they have introduced clawbacks, which reduce the payment to zero, if they can get away with it, then you can't say it's a, compensation, or like, you're not getting remunerated, you're not getting paid back, you're not having the scales balanced for your loss. Now, seeing I was talking about that, jog my memory, I recently published a poll in which I asked, listen, were you part of the Dennis Menu's class action? After the class action and you won, did you still not get any money because of other clawbacks like the Canada Pension Plan Disability and or the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act pension? And I got people that said yes, that happened to them. Now, I've always said I knew it happened. You can't tell me that it wouldn't happen because I know the way they administer the policy. But you can't tell me it's fair. You go through 5 years of litigation as part of a class. After the class action is over and you think you won and you think you're going to get damages in contract to pay you back for all the Pension Act clawback that they did, they turn around and say to you, sorry buddy, you're not getting a copper because you know what? We're going to apply the other clawback. So you know what? You went through 5 years of litigation for nothing, you know? I got a word for that, and that's son of a bitches. They are fuckers to do that. Now, probably shouldn't be saying this because people probably think that my criticism of McKinnis Cooper is a bad thing. But I think they ought to have known about the fact that someone could be a double zero-sum veteran. Because there were zero-sum veterans who were veterans who had such a high Pension Act clawback that they ended up not getting any SISIP, long-term disability. And I would think that a lot of them people, they had the Canadian Forces pension and or the Canada Pension Plan left alone, which creates an expectation, a reasonable expectation that they'd still leave it alone, even if they were told they can't take the pension into account. So, McKinnis Cooper should have said, you know, it's against justice for you. These people were part of the class. And you might do it to other people. But the people that are part of this class, the people that took you to court, you can't take other things into account after you stop taking the pension into account. It's just not moral. It's not in accordance with the rule of law. It's not fair. It's not equitable. You know what they could say? It's against the Canada Pension Plan Act, Section 65(1). You know what? It's against the Financial Administration Act, Section 67. You know what? It's against Section 83 of the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act. You fuckers, you get out of my face. You're not taking those things into account. You go fuck yourself. But they let it happen. Now, I'm sure they'd say, well, we were just going along with what, you know, always happens, and the clawbacks are around all the time, and they're doing it all the time, and there's nothing wrong with it. Really? Really? Well, what happened to the fact that for the SISIP policy, they didn't take the Canada Pension Plan Disability into account, according to Section 65(3) of the Canada Pension Plan Act, at least, because that was inserted into the law in 1991 or 1993. I've got two different dates. But if they were taken into account, they weren't authorized in the law because the law wasn't changed. So up to 1991 or 1993, Section 65(1) would have applied. And, as I keep saying, even though I probably shouldn't say, go fuck yourself. If you're asking someone to break the law, you shouldn't go along with it. Now, let me just go into one more thing because I was looking at it. Actually, paragraph 6 is where it was. I didn't know if it was the one that was in the affidavit. But it says, SISIP insurance policy 901-102 was issued on the 1st of December 1969 and included a long-term disability benefit equal to 60% of the members' pay at release, plus 5% for each dependent child, up to a maximum of 75%, to keep premiums as low as possible. Now, little aside here, breaking the fourth wall. Who said that's a goal of insurance, to keep the insurance premiums low? I don't think people are worried about the insurance premiums when they're buying insurance for peace of mind. If they were that worried about it, they wouldn't buy it. And in keeping with a common feature in both public and private long-term disability plans, see, this is what I'm trying to say. They're trying to say that everybody does it, so it's okay. But they already lost that case in Manoj. The SISIP policy contains Section 21A4, which reduces SISIP long-term disability benefits to take into account other disabilities, such as those received pursuant to the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act and the Canada Pension Plan. Well, it just occurred to me, because I'm reading this and I got obsessive-compulsive personality disorder, they should learn how to make an argument in law. It's not factual what they just said. You see, Section 24A of the policy takes, A1 takes something into account, 2 takes something else into account, 3 takes something else into account, and 4 took the Pension Act pension into account. Now, they just talked about Section 24A4 taking into account the Canada Pension Plan and the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act. But that's factually incorrect. Only the Pension Act was covered under Section 21A4. So, the thing is, I get all caught up in this stuff because they shouldn't be doing it, okay? Every person has this sense of justice, okay? You might be blissfully ignorant, not knowing what they're doing is wrong, which is why I make these videos, why I post columns, and why I post just regular posts. I'm trying to get people to take the wool off their eyes and see what's really happening. I was going to shut up, but I'll mention one other thing. They don't seem to realize that my understanding after the Taft Federal Court 2019 case, that the government admitted that it was a human rights violation to take into account the Pension Act pension under the earnings loss benefit, even though they had written a law, Section 22A of the Veterans Wellbeing Act regulations, so they authorized it in law. But the law itself broke Charter Section 51. Because you see, Canada, being a representative democracy, they decided that they were going to be really nice about things and not treat the disabled badly. So they said in Section 51 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms that they listed off 6 or 7 different items like race, age, sex, and they said disability. They were going to be enumerated items that people could not have laws in or under the law that put a burden on them. Now, think about the fact that you're disabled, you get medically released because you can't perform your services in the military. You then got the Pension Act pension in the Manoj case, right? Now, Canada had the CISIP policy and they had the earnings loss benefit. So they took both of them into account. One was under Section 24A4 of the CISIP policy in contract, and the other one was in Section 22A of the Veterans Wellbeing Act regulations. So the CISIP policy was sued, and the government paid $1.9 billion to discharge the debt they owed people because they took it into account and they violated the contract. But no money was paid for the violation of their human rights. Now, the Taft class action was about, at least I thought it was supposed to be, about the earnings loss benefit taking the Pension Act into account, and they didn't go back as far retroactively. But the government decided it was going to settle the case as a human rights case. And I thought I saw it was $100 million, though when I Googled it today or yesterday, it came out to be a different number they listed on something else. So I'm not sure, and maybe I'll do a bit more digging. But the fact is they settled it as a human rights case, and they didn't settle it as like we violated the law. So sort of like the contract case with CISIP. So what I'm saying is that they're on the hook still, as far as I'm concerned. I didn't have the Pension Act deducted. I don't get it. I'm not part of either suit. But I will mention something that I think is very suspicious. They did say in the case that I read online, so it's a public matter, that 15,000 veterans formed a class. Now that seems pretty high to me. There was 10,000 people in the CISIP case, so how did they get 5,000 people more in the Taft case? I don't understand it. But leading seaman retired Sean Korean. I happened to have a lot of his information because I was trying to help him. And they were deducting at Veterans Affairs the Pension Act off of the earnings loss benefit. At the same time, they were deducting it from the Service Income Support Insurance Plan. But he wasn't made part of the top class section. Now, why was that? How come his name wasn't given to the class? Because they depended on Veterans Affairs Canada for the names of the people that should have gotten the payment. So why wasn't he included? How many other people are just like him? Now, when I was looking at his data, the numbers that they had listed on the form from October the 31st, 2006, didn't match. It was like they grossed it up for taxes. Now, under Section 81(1)(d) of the Income Tax Act, the Pension Act is not taxable. Now, I've seen it in the past, but I haven't found a reference yet, where the president of CPPD was trying to tell the government when he was summoned to talk to the Senate Committee on National Defense and Veterans Affairs, you know, it could be worse. We didn't gross up the pension to deduct it off of CPPD. We only take it into account dollar for dollar when we could have grossed it up, say, 30%. The Veterans Affairs appears to have done exactly that. Now, I've said this many times, but the Pension Act is actually taxed because it's based on the after-tax income of a public servant. Now, if you base something on the after-tax income of a public servant, you can't very well gross it up for taxes, can you? How can you gross up something for taxes when you already took taxes into account, you son of a bitch? On that note, the last point, I promise, because I'm getting dried out here, and sometimes I wonder if any of these videos are doing any damn good. Sometimes I wonder if I should put some kind of background or look into something and do it nice and neat and all that. But this is not my job. This is not my living. I'm just trying to educate people. Okay? Here's this other thought. Sean had a wife, has a wife, and 1 or 2 kids. And they were included in the payment from the Pension Act. But you see, those are called supplemental pensions. There's the basic pension that's paid to the veteran, and then there's the supplemental pension that the government decides to pay if you have a dependent. That pension is the property of the other person and not the veteran. So both CPPD and Veterans Affairs Canada should never have touched anything but the basic pension. They were taking into account whatever payment Veterans Affairs Canada was making. So that, to me, is another class action. If the people wanted to take into account, they'd leave the basic. If you were part of the CPPD class action, you'd leave the basic pension out because you already sued on that. But the people who do have a class action isn't the veteran, it's the dependents. Listen, that's a mental exercise. I doubt anybody will ever look at it. And here's my point about what occurs to me, and I can't shut up without saying it. I think people like Sean was left out because they were part of the CPPD class action. So I think the government said to themselves, well, if you were part of the CPPD class action, why should you be part of the top class action? Because you already get paid off. You already got your money. So what are you trying to get paid twice? I can see that being the reasoning why. Or it could be just a mistake. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.